Good.
Well, at long last, here we are.
Yeah, how are you getting on?
I I'm doing great.
You
Well,
know,
that's good.
I got nothing to complain about inside my life bubble,
Yeah, that's always a good
and
thing.
the book is doing really well. We're already in our second printing,
Oh, wow.
so yeah, so people are responding to it as I hope they would.
Yeah. I have your lovely book here,
Uh,
which is
thank,
The Sun
thank
Isn't
you.
Shining. It's a cool book, man. I really liked it.
Hey, do you want to stop and start to make your editing life easier?
No, it's all good. I'm so used to this editing now. I'm kind of in, that's the worst part of doing a podcast is the editing. It's like, kind of the podcast is fine, but just doing the editing is a lot. And I started making these videos now where I kind of, outside of the podcast, where I talk about the history of a song and then I recreate the song and show people how to recreate it. So I did Good Vibrations a few weeks ago,
Ah,
and I keep getting copyright strikes because they think I'm taking the actual song and uploading it. So then I have to take it down and change bits and pieces so it doesn't sound close to it, which I suppose is a kind of good thing in a way. But yeah, but it was interesting doing Good Vibrations because I have a theremin here and I have loads of instruments, so and I can play a few of them. But it was cool kind of going through the thing and
what in the world are you doing with the theremin?
oh, I had a song that I needed a theremin for, and I got a theremin.
That's spectacular.
Yeah, I have a theremin. I have loads of stuff. I have a sitar back there. I have guitars. I have drums. I have pianos, all that kind of stuff. So anytime I need something, I kind of, because where I live is so small, I just have to learn the instrument. Not saying I can learn it too well, but I can learn it kind of to a point that it's okay, passable.
You
So
mean you mean the city is so small it's unlikely there's going to be somebody who can play that instrument living
oh,
near you.
I live in a village. Like it's not even a
Yeah.
city. It's like a tiny village. Like
Well,
and
the original Good Vibrations was recorded, I think, in four different studios.
yeah, Western and all that kind of stuff. There was a few of them, wasn't there?
Western Columbia, Gold Star. I mean, he was all over the place for that. Yeah.
Yeah, what a record though. And I love the splice on that. Like there's that clear. There's a few splices where you can kind of take it, and yeah, man, what a record that is. That's like one of the greatest records ever. It's just such a good record. It really is. Yeah,
It's hard to believe that he did that essentially by himself with all these great musicians and the great Beach Boys vocal instrument he had created.
yeah,
But the months he spent trying to figure out how to put it together, it's just remarkable.
I know it's crazy. I always think the Beatles had George Martin, but like Brian was kind of George Martin and that kind of whole thing as well. I think people
Well, yeah,
think I
when I interviewed George Martin,
yeah.
um, and we were talking about this, and it was like John had Paul and Paul had John, and they all had each other, and then they had Jeff Emerick and George Martin in the booth,
Yeah.
and he didn't know. He knew that Brian composed, arranged, and produced,
Mm.
but he didn't know that was Brian on a vocal on top of everything.
Right,
So,
right.
so he said, "Why does one person have so much talent? It's just not fair." I mean, he said it was so sweet, and because he was really, with the exception of Stevie Wonder in the '70s, the only person to do it at that level by themselves.
Yeah, yeah. Was that from the Beautiful Dreamer documentary that because I remember he said something very vaguely reminiscent in that documentary about that.
Probably, yes.
Man, I think I watched that documentary about a million times. I remember like I had worn it out. I watched it so many times. It was like there was a few things when I got into the Beach Boys. It was like they had a. Do you remember that documentary on? 'Cause you were in it as well. It was the biography channel. Did this like
Yes.
2 hour. That was man. I had a VHS and I wore the tape out on it because I watched it so many times. But it's kind of like that, people who got into Beach Boys are like really into it. Like they get really into it because there's kind of and it was pre-Smile, the Brian Wilson Smile. So that kind of lore of Smile was like, oh my God, what is this? Fascinating.
Yeah, you ought to check out the Don Was documentary
Oh,
as
I
well.
did. Yeah, I have that. I just wasn't made for these times.
Yes.
That's
Um,
brilliant.
it's the thing about all of this is there's this giant jigsaw puzzle called Smile that everybody wants to put the pieces together. And in the book, I put as many pieces together as I could find of the story. But there's still missing pieces. There's still things we will never ever know. We won't know how he would have finished if he had been given a year to work on it. We don't know what impact it would have had if he had finished it before Sergeant Pepper, after Sergeant Pepper. We just those are just unanswerable questions. If there's it's fun to talk about. But you mentioned Beautiful Dreamer, Nelson Bragg from the Brian Wilson band. He said we had this thing. You're too young for this, but we had this thing over here when we were in high school called Cliff Notes. And Cliff Notes were like if the teacher in English assigned Julius Caesar or The Grapes of Wrath or whatever, you didn't want to read it, you would read the Cliff Notes version of it.
All
So you
right.
so you knew just enough to do okay on the test.
Yeah.
And he said that Beautiful Dreamer is like the Cliff Notes version of this book. And that's a pretty good description. I mean, there's the amount of material in the book that no one has heard before is one of the things I'm most proud of.
Yeah, like there was loads of stuff with Van Dyke. Because I know that documentary
Yes.
so much, but the Van Dyke stuff, I was like, oh wow, I've never heard that before. I never knew, and I think I know a lot about the Beach Boys, but I never knew he lived with Brian during him and his wife Dory during when they were doing Smile. I was like, oh wow, they lived together. I was like, that's cool, man.
That's right. I mean, there's all these details that
Mm.
that are just, you know, so okay, so there was a guest room and Van Dyke and Dury slept there sometimes. So while Brian and Van Dyke are up all night writing, are Dury and Marilyn Wilson sitting there watching?
Yeah,
It's like okay, what's actually going on? Are
yeah,
are they in the kitchen just talking? There's just there's all of these things that you would need a time machine. Obviously, there were no iPhones, and the little footage there was of the Beach Boys in the studio that was shot for the Leonard Bernstein documentary, all of it seems to have vanished with the exception of Brian's performance of Surfs Up.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
so it's frustrating. You look at a picture. I mean, Jasper Daly took these great color pictures from the sessions, and you wonder, okay, so what was going on that day? You can look at the session sheet, and
Mm.
okay, so here's what they were recording. You can hear those ultimate track bootlegs where you hear the sessions, but really, does that put you in Brian's head? No, you're just a witness to it
Yeah, yeah,
without
yeah,
necessarily knowing what's behind the scenes.
yeah. Did you actually, because you knew Brian before he did Brian Wilson Presents Smile, did you actually think Smile, even in his version, would ever come out?
No,
Really?
it was an absolute stunning surprise to all of us when he decided to do it, agreed to do it. Um, the and I was as surprised as really as anybody, and I was there when he announced it in London.
Yeah.
Um, and 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 when I came back, all that we did was my late wife and I was like, let's buy our plane tickets now so we can get a good fare. Let's book a hotel
Yeah,
now.
yeah,
That,
yeah,
that we want to be there for this.
yeah,
I
yeah.
I never expected to be making Beautiful Dreamer. That was an accident of friendship in that
Ah,
you know Brian and I were walking uh, back to my apartment one day from the movies up this place in Santa Monica called the Third Street Promenade, and he said, I can't do this unless you're there with me every day.
right.
And I was
Wow.
like, what are you talking about? What do you mean I'm there? I'm not a musician. What do you mean there every day?
Yeah.
Well, it was similar to what had happened when he had gone on his first tour in 1999
Mm.
when he had called from Chicago and said, I need you guys here. And what he was saying is he needed people around him who loved him unconditionally. He needed that feeling.
Right.
And Brian, I said, I can't be there every day. I got a company. We're making documentaries. I need you every day. I need you there. And I said, well, if we made a documentary, that's the kind of the only way I could be there every day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And and he said, well, okay. Which is Brian's way. I mean, he's brilliant at getting what he wants.
Right, right, right. Does he kind of strikes me as he needs kind of people around him, like as a kind of anchor to, because things are kind of hard on us. He needs people that, like you said, that he loves and stuff to be around him. Because I think when you look back, this is only my thinking, when you look back on him in the 60s, and anyone when they get kind of that amount of fame, they have so many hanger-oners that want to get what he has, and they can't get what he has because they
Right.
think they can hang out with him, get what they get. And I think probably as you get older, you realize that who your true friends are, who the true people are looking out for you. But I suppose when you're in that area of fame, it can be quite difficult back then to kind of know who's the spongers and all that kind of thing.
Well, that's right. And the truth is, kind of everybody's a sponger.
Right.
Um, and
Right.
and so and so he knew from, decades of friendship
Mm.
that, we'd go out to dinner and, ride in the car, and we'd turn it to the oldies station, and we'd sing along. He loved doing what he called casual singing. And, what could be better than riding in a car singing along with Brian Wilson? We had a courtyard in the apartment building we lived in, and one day we had a party where we had a karaoke, and Brian went on stage as Dion, and my older brother and I went on stage as the Belmonts, and we sang "Teenager in Love." He loved singing. He loved the sound of voices. He loves the sound of harmony. He
Uh-huh.
just, he reached a point where the problems became overwhelming.
Mm. Mm.
And that's why the book is called The Rise and Fall, because he just reached a point where he put it on the shelf. And there's about 13 reasons in the book that he and I offer, as why didn't he finish it? And perhaps the most significant one, because there are people who say, oh, he was taking too many drugs. Yeah, well, maybe he was taking too many drugs. Why was he taking so many drugs? Who the heck knows? Sometimes people self-medicate with drugs. But he said, I knew I needed a year to finish it, and I figured nobody would give me a year. So if you think Good Vibrations is 3.5 minutes, and that took him 3 months to record and piece together, well, how long would it take him to piece together a 35 or 40-minute album? And that's
Yeah.
what he's talking about. And back in the 60s, when the Beach Boys were on Capitol, you look, some years it's 2 albums, some years it's 3 albums, some years it's 4 albums.
Mm.
Um, and that was just an overwhelming amount of pressure. And he knew how great the Smile music was, and he would not be rushed. Now,
Yeah.
36 and a half years later, that's a whole different story. But the question of how great the music was never an issue.
Yeah. Yeah, because like they worked at such a frenetic pace back then. I think if Brian was probably in the 70s, he probably could have finished it more of like it wasn't, you could do an album a year, and it wasn't even then you could maybe get away with an album every 2 years, and now you could do an album whenever you want. But I mean, in the 60s, like you said, there was 2 albums a year, and like even the Beatles would release 2 albums and put a single out or double A's. I think that wasn't even on the album. It was like that kind of pace was ridiculous, and it is crazy when you think about how high the level the music was and the pace that it was released. It's just,
Well, yeah, 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 yeah. It's staggering because he did Pet Sounds, Good Vibrations, and Smile all in the same year.
yeah, that's crazy, man. It's
And
wow.
and and the issues that I, that when I first wrote the Beach Boys and the California Myth in 1977. I was 25. I was kind of a young, outrage, angry journalist, if you will.
Right.
Now I'm you see the silver hair. I'm an elder statesman,
You're
and
looking
and
good,
so
man. You're looking good.
thanks. So I can look back and say, okay, well, you know, in 1966, the Beach Boys were married. Some had children. They had homes, and
Mhm.
so now they're scared they're about to lose their livelihood if
Right.
this music comes out.
Right.
And there was no Brian Epstein. There was no George Martin. There was no as much as David Anderley worked to give Brian artistic freedom, he hadn't been there for a few months.
Yes.
And he was an outsider. And Murray Wilson had essentially turned the Beach Boys into a family business.
Mm,
And anything that wasn't good for the family wasn't good for the Beach Boys.
mm. Yeah.
So Brian could write hits with Gary Usher and Roger Christian and Jan Berry and no, those guys, no, we don't want those guys around. This is a family business.
I wonder did that article at the time probably do put a bit more distance between them when it was like I remember that it was I seen it not at the time obviously but on a documentary where it's Brian and it was like Brian had he had them as like marionettes and it was like Brian
Yes.
Wilson's genius and those kind of little things I think can cause
I'm
force
I'm
because
sh- I'm sure I'm sure. I mean, they were. You remember how young they were?
yeah like
Uh,
25, 26 that kind of
well, no, not even that old. No, no,
what age is
no.
Brian 24
Brian was 24, and
yeah
Dennis and Carl were younger.
oh
Mike was
yeah yeah
a year older. So when the Beach Boys start, Dennis and Carl are still in high school. I mean, it's so they don't know anything else but Beach Boys. They didn't go to trade school. They didn't go to college. They're Beach Boys. What's going to happen if the Beach Boys end? Now, what you're talking about in terms of Smile, he had gone through that to a certain degree on Pet Sounds. So he had already been through this once and gotten what he needed from them in terms of vocals. And Good Vibrations had kind of shut everybody up.
yeah
The record company was, why is it taking so long? Why is it costing so much? And because at the time it was, probably the most expensive single in the history of popular music. But because it's a million selling number one, everybody goes, oh, okay. Now Brian was deep into Smile by the time Good Vibrations comes out.
Mm,
And he's going his merry way because he understood that if he didn't grow, if the Beach Boys records didn't change, that it would, you know, they would go downhill regardless of what he did. Another album of surfing songs wasn't going to happen. That had ended already in 65. And, one of the great quotes from, you were talking about that 66 article in one of the British rock papers where Brian's hands and the Beach Boys are indeed like marionettes. Um, they were his vocal instrument. As Dennis said, Brian as the Beach Boys were his messengers. So there's two different groups. There's the group that goes out on tour, and then there's the group that makes records. Now Brian's primarily making the record. He's composing the songs. He's arranging the backing tracks. He's producing it. When they come to town, he's teaching them their vocals and they're singing them, and then he's mixing it and finishing it. And so that's the arrangement. Now with there was grumbling during Pet Sounds, but that grumbling reached a different level during Smile. And with as you say, with the benefit of hindsight, we can understand that. However, my question is, was anybody at the record company or anybody within the Beach Boys listening to what was happening to popular music? Because if you were just a vocal band writing with great songs in Southern California in the mid 60s, now there were the Turtles, the Association, the Mamas and the Papas. There were all these other groups making great hit sounds, terrific vocal groups. Brian wasn't competing with them. He was competing with the Beatles. He was competing with himself. He heard how the Beatles had gone from Rubber Soul to Revolver. And in an interview he does in 66, he says, our next album is going to be as different from Sounds as Pet Sounds was from Summer Days. Now, how high a bar is he setting? But he said it with complete confidence because he knew what he was doing. And so what he needed was not what he got. Um, in the mid 90s, when he kind of emerged to do a lot of press for both Orange Crate Art and the Don Was documentary, he was asked, why are you back out here in the world? And he says, I have emotional security. Well, that emotional security seems to have disappeared towards the end of the Smile era, because as David Anderley said, Brian needed 100% support. Van Dyke Parks put it differently, that Brian didn't need 100% support. He deserved to be able to do whatever he wanted to do because he had made everybody rich and famous and was selling records by the ton. And if this is what he wanted to do, this is what should be done. David Anderley also said that he never really saw Smile as a Beach Boys project.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way. Yeah.
But Brian had been taught loyalty by his father and had been accused of being disloyal when he quit touring. So you've got all this stuff roiling in his head, and his father hadn't disappeared. He was still bullying him as the Beach Boys publisher, and Capitol Records didn't like what they were hearing. And so this is all going on while he's trying to figure it out. And maybe, Mrs. O'Leary's Cow is the music that comes out of the unhappiness, of the dissonance in his life.
Mm.
But what is sad is that instead of shelving it, if Brian had taken Surf's Up, Wonderful, Cabanescence, Wind Chimes, Vegetables, Heroes and Villains, as unfinished as it was in his head, Our Prayer, the backing tracks that didn't have vocals and lyrics put on them yet, like Do You Like Worm? If he had just put that out as an album in January or February of 67, people would have been going, what in the world is this?
Yeah.
And they would have been stunned, and some would have loved it, and some would have, said, well, this isn't the Beach Boys, because, the word wouldn't have been used back then, but it didn't fit the Beach Boys brand, if you will. But the people who bought Pet Sounds and the people who bought Good Vibrations, the people who loved side two of Beach Boys Today and The Little Girl I Once Knew, would have heard this music and gone, oh my God. Especially it was a time when people were starting to use more chemicals. So, I never was lucky enough to do that and listen to this music, because
Oh,
I'm sure this would have been an amazing experience.
yeah.
Uh,
It's never
uh,
too late.
well, I think you're right. It's never too late. Maybe for my 80th birthday, that's what I'll do.
Yeah, get some mushrooms, put on Smile.
Uh,
I've done that before. It's good fun.
so the other thing that was happening, there were all of these groups appearing in 66, like the Buffalo Springfield and
Yeah, yeah. Mm,
Cream. And so if you're listening to popular music, you realize how dramatically things are changing. And the
mm,
British understood that. And the British were like, oh my God, here's the Who's next single, and here's the Stones next single, and here's the Zombies. And it was like one incredible thing after another. In America, the record company wanted more of the same. As their product manager said, can't you give us some more stuff like California Girls? And the answer was no. The answer was no. I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah,
going to do that. I've done that.
yeah. And California Girls, the intro is quite, you know, it's not, it's like classical music, basically, the intro. So it's kind of like, and as a song, it's more leaning towards of kind of more that direction, even though it doesn't necessarily sound like uh, Pet Sounds or Smile. You can see it, there's a leading when you, in hindsight, I think in
Well,
hindsight more
well,
than
yes.
probably,
So here's how American radio would have worked in 1965.
yeah.
So you've got that incredible symphonic opening to California Girls. The disc jockey would have talked over it.
Really?
He would have said it's 12:34 in the afternoon here in New York City. We're having a great day, and what we've got here for you is the latest sound from the Beach Boys. They're taking us all over the world with their California Girls, and that would have been called "Talking Up to the leading to the record." And then it would be, well, East Coast Girls. You wouldn't have heard that incredible piece of music unless you bought the record.
Wow. That's interesting, man. Wow. And awful
So,
at the same time.
well, and that's why so many of you think of I Get Around, you know, coming in right away with the vocal, round round
Mm,
get around, and so the DJs couldn't do that. They would have to say, "Here's the latest from the Beach Boys." Boom, hit it, and you'd be into it. Um,
mm. So
and
how
it
would,
wouldn't be just the Beach Boys. It would have been think if I want to hold your hand, the instrumental introduction to that. They would have been talking about that.
right.
Hey, the Fab Four are on their way to America. They're going to be on the Ed Sullivan Show on February 9th. So make sure you're in front of your TVs that night. Here it is, their latest and greatest. I want to hold your hands. And
Oh,
that was what top 40 hit radio was about. There never being instrumental sounds.
so no one's hearing that Mellotron intro to Strawberry Fields Forever. It's just like, let me take you down. Here we
I'm
go.
I, I'm sure. I'm sure. Now the difference was by 67, FM radio is starting to come in. In England,
Right.
you had satellite radio
Yeah, the
where they
pirate
weren't
radio too.
pirate radio. They weren't doing that crazy stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's some cool there's some cool documentaries about pirate radios. There's one called was it Caroline FM or something like that? It was like off. There was a net.
Caroline was one of them. Yeah.
Yeah, and a Netherlands one. I remember my mother telling me there was one like pirate thing from I think it was the Netherlands or something like that. And they'd be just playing whatever they want. I think that probably led to the 70s of like, when people would play full albums, they just play Led Zeppelin and come on, just play the full album, which is so cool. I think that was, like you said about Smile, kind of Smile and Brian's way of thinking was leading to kind of what came with concept albums and stuff like that. And I always it's sad kind of looking back. I always think because I love look the Beach Boys did Sunflower. I think is one of their best albums. I think that's a beautiful record. But I always kind of wonder what Brian would have done, especially when you look at the stuff in the 70s with prog and stuff like that. I kind of wonder would he have gone that like does Brian like prog music or anything like that? Does he like any like out there stuff like that?
Well, he's a top 40 guy. I mean, he was a radio guy. So to him, when he heard Bohemian Rhapsody, it was like, oh my God. That was the one. He said I think he called it a teenage dream when he heard that. Um, but he was, most of us are get stuck in the music of our childhood and our teen years,
Mm, mm.
maybe into our 20s.
Does he
Uh,
ever like would he talk to you about like regrets with to do with that he never finished Smile or albums that they would have had put out like that, or is he just kind of like he's fine with it? It doesn't really bother him.
well, imagine
It's
so,
probably a
so
big
you're
question there.
so you're well, let me take it in different ways. So you're Brian Wilson, you've created this amazing music and it doesn't come out. And for the next 36 and a half years, every single interview you do,
That's a
people
good
are
point.
asking you about Smile.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good
So
point.
so so he moved on. but he couldn't really move on because when you talk about did he listen to prog rock, Smile is prog rock.
Yeah, it's
So
very
he
pr
so he's making it in 66, 67. He's ahead of the curve. And that's the sadness of it, that he didn't get to do it.
yeah.
That he got stuck, and um you know more than the said, as fans, what we lost is, okay, what was going to be next after
Mm,
Smile.
mm.
And and so us, I think Bob Haynes, who was a big fan, called us the Brianistas. And the hardcore Brianistas that I was friends with, me and Ray and Debbie and Eva, is like, as much as the loss of Smile was tragic, what was he going to do next? And
Yeah.
and so because it would have been incredible. We just, whatever it would have been incredible. And we heard with that Lucky Old Son and the Gershwin album, we got a taste of when he was freed from the albatross of Smile. What would he have done? In terms of talking to me about it, um, Smile was not a, it's, I used this analogy once. If you had a friend who had a child die in childbirth, you wouldn't really bring it up. Um, but I did, the first time I talked to him about Smile was when Capitol had hired us to do the Good Vibrations box set.
Hmm.
And when I was going over the track listing with him, um, there was one song he wanted taken off. Don't ask me, I won't tell you which one. Um, but it's like, okay, you wrote, arranged, and produced this stuff. It wasn't a hit. If you don't want it on there, we'll take it off. Great song, great track, but okay. And then I kind of swallowed hard and said, Brian, between the Good Vibrations single and the Heroes and Villains single, there's a giant gap on the box set.
Huh.
And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, you spent 6 or 7 months working on Smile. This is a career retrospective. I'm not asking you to finish Smile, but it would be great to have some representative music from that era,
Yeah.
so that this box set works. And he was like, okay, what songs should we put on there? And so I said, I said, I didn't hesitate. I was like, well, Surf's Up and Cabin Essence and Wind Chimes and Wonderful and Heroes and Villains, and whatever ended up on the box set is there. And then Mark Lynette put some more stuff on the disc 5, the bonus disc, and so finally in one spot there was a pile of Smile music, and and that changed a lot. First of all, it made the box set went gold, and I think that's pretty unusual for box sets.
Definitely.
It got amazing critical acclaim, in large part because of the Smile music being on there,
Okay.
and so I really thought that was going to be it.
Hmm.
And then I was talking to Brian, um, not too long after that, and I said, I'd really like to get a symphony orchestra to perform the music of Smile, and have a choir sing the parts. And I said, this music is just too beautiful not to be heard. And he said, good, I deserve it. So this is nothing. There's nothing shy about this man, except meeting strangers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, so unfortunately, I wasn't able to make that happen. But then he and I came up with this idea, because the Good Vibrations box was for the 30th anniversary of the Beach Boys' first top 10 single. I said, Brian, let's do a 30th anniversary collection every 6 months. We'll do it for Pet Sounds. We'll a big box for Pet Sounds, and we'll have I said we'll have the tracks without the vocals and the vocals without the tracks. And he goes, people really want to hear that? I go, yeah, people really want to hear that. And so he said, okay. And I said, and then in October of '66, we'll do a 2 CD Good Vibrations Sessions collection. And then in the following spring, we'll do a Smile Sessions box set. And we'd worked out a series of box sets that would, collect all of this great work. 5 years. And we went to Capitol and we presented to them and they loved it. And the Pet Sound Sessions box set was the first one.
Was that
And
96? Was that
it
96?
it was supposed to come out in 96, but it came out in 97, about 14 months later. And I remember at the time, because you want to talk about being on a short deadline. I had 6 weeks to write the two books that are inside the box.
Wow.
And I interviewed everyone who would talk to me, the musicians, Paul McCartney had already done an interview, George Martin, and I knew I didn't have time to do the interviews and transcribe them. So I sat with my phone like this and my hands on the keyboard, and I can type really fast. And so I would type it up and then I would send it to them to make sure I'd gotten it right.
Uh-huh.
So we get the box set done. Like from the last week of January, everything is submitted by the first week of March. And then I hear there's grumbling within the Beach Boys world. Um, and what I hear is that Brian's getting too much credit.
Okay. The usual.
And I said to the guys at Capitol, so Brian composed, arranged, and produced every note of music on the album except Sloop Chun B.
Hmm.
There are two instrumentals. There are two songs where he sings a solo vocal without backing. There's one song where it's just he, Carl, and Bruce. So on 5 of the tracks, there are no Beach Boys at all. How am I possibly giving him too much credit for the album?
Yeah.
And the answer was, we understand what you're saying. We don't disagree with what you're saying, but it's a Beach Boys project and they have to agree to it. And I heard, and I don't know if this was true, we had designed the front cover where it says The Beach Boys, The Pet Sound Sessions, produced by Brian Wilson. I heard there was unhappiness that Brian's name was on the cover.
Okay. Even though he did produce it, which is bizarre. Like, I mean, it's a factual kind of thing.
Again, why isn't his name on the back the way producers' names are always on the back? So it was a very frustrating time, and it ended up essentially being the last time I ever worked on a Beach Boys project.
Okay.
Because of that, which was fine. Uh, the pay was lousy. The deadlines were horrific, and
Yeah.
but I was very proud to do the two furs that came out in 1990, the CD releases of the Capitol catalog. The Good Vibrations box set was, spectacularly exciting to work on getting Smile music out, and the Pet
Yeah.
Sound Session. Okay, if that's the coda here, uh, uh, so be it. Um, and coincidental to all of that, um, Brian starts his solo career in earnest by beginning to tour,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and it was a whole different journey. Yeah, so when it was announced that Brian was going to go on tour, I
Hmm.
I said I said to myself and my late wife, I said, that is the craziest idea I have ever heard. I'm so glad it wasn't mine. And
Yeah.
it shows you how wrong you can be.
Mm.
Because if he doesn't do that 4 date tour, which leads to more dates and ultimately this great band coalescing around him, which leads to 2000, which is when he does the Pet Sounds tour, which leads to that band being the backing band at the All-Star tribute to Brian Wilson, which I wrote and produced. If these things don't happen, there's no Brian Wilson Presents Smile. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah. That All-Star tribute, how did that go about getting him to actually play Smile music live? Because, I remember that story about him. Someone, I think it was Darian, was saying that they were at a party and he just starts playing Heroes and Villains or something like that.
So what happened is Eva my wife was sitting next to Brian on a piano bench with their backs to the piano, and she threw crazy Christmas parties every year, and he would come, and he loved Christmas too.
Mhm.
And because it was all, the table was filled with food, and so music and food are like right there.
Yeah, I've seen
And
that with Brian.
and he said to her, this was a Christmas party at Scott Bennett's house, from the Brian band, and there were Darian and Probin and other members of the band were there. And he turned to her and says, "What do you want for Christmas?" And she said, "For you to play heroes and villains." And he said, "Okay." And he just turned around and played it.
Yeah.
And as Probin says, everyone heard the piano and the song. They came running from all over the house. And when it was over, I said to him, I said, Brian, you really should play that at the tribute next year. And he said, okay. And again, it it wasn't a demand. There was no pressure applied. It was just friends suggesting things. And he responded well to that. And as I had been trying to sell the tribute for years and years and years, and finally a bunch of amazing coincidences came together and it happened. But as it was kind of my baby, I insisted on there being smile music. So
Yeah.
that's why the tribute opens with the Boys Choir of Harlem singing Our Prayer. Because that separated it from it being a Beach Boys tribute. That made it something that was like you were sitting there going, "Whoa, okay, this is going to be different."
Yeah.
And then later in the show, I also insisted that the song "Surfs Up" be included. And we were sitting at a production meeting, and the talent producer, Ali Gifford, was like, who could sing this song? And she said, I remember it. She said, let me pray on that. And the next day she came in and she said, I think Vince Gill could do it. And I had a couple of Pure Prairie League albums, but I didn't know that Vince Gill had been in Pure Prairie League and had sung those beautiful vocals. So it was like, okay, Ali, if you think he can. And Phil Ramone, who was the music producer, brilliant, brilliant
Oh
man,
wow, cool.
had the
He did
had the
pretty well.
idea had the idea of putting Vince and David Crosby and Jimmy Webb together as a trio with
Yeah.
Brian's band. So that's the first time Surfs Up had been performed, uh, at a Beach Boys Brian Wilson event since probably 1993. I had seen the Beach Boys in '71, and Carl did an amazing version of Surfs Up. But it
Mm.
was it was just it was an amazing moment in the show. And Vince had sung "The Warmth of the Sun" earlier in the program, which you can Google and see, and just it's mind blowing how great a singer he is. And I was standing with his manager at rehearsal, and I said, God, to his manager, I said, it's just a great singer. And his manager goes, as great a singer as he is, he's a better guitar player. And as great a guitar player as he is, he's a better golfer. And I said, then you mean he's a scratch golfer, meaning no handicap? And he goes, he is.
Wow.
Just an amazing. And the thing about Vince Gill is he had never heard the song before. So when
Wow.
when Phil Ramone asked him to do it, he thought it was going to be like Surfing Safari or Surfing USA. He didn't know, and then he listened to it, and it happened to coincide with the time when he and his wife were having a baby. So he's got to learn this song, and just he delivered this amazing music. Now, what you don't know is that Brian is on the side of the stage observing all of this.
Right,
He's
right.
he's taking it in, all these people singing his songs, saying beautiful things about him. Sir George Martin comes out, and you were talking before about the sponges in the business.
Mm.
There are people who always want to tell you, "Hey, you know who loves your music?" Like they're the messenger bringing you news that the Beatles love your music.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
Brian, tells the story that, after he finished Pet Sounds, John and Paul called him to tell him how much they loved it. So he
That's
heard it
so cool.
and he knew it. But to hear George Martin representing the Beatles talking about Brian Wilson, you know, as the living genius of pop music,
Mm.
now he's seeing George Martin say it. So he's absorbing all of this. And then he and the band come out to do Heroes and Villains. And as Jeffrey Foskett explains in the book, uh, Heroes and Villains was sung in his regular voice, not his falsetto.
Hmm.
So when he starts, it's startling because he hits it sounds like Brian Wilson 67 singing. I've been in this town, and it's kind of like a giant wind machine blowing everybody back. It's like, holy mackerel, this is unbelievable. And when he
Yeah.
finishes and gets this enormous standing ovation, it's, oh my goodness, Smile Music has gone out into the world, and the world hasn't come to an end. People actually want to hear this music. And they start to do Smile Music as part of his tours.
Do you think he actually was actually did he think people actually wouldn't like it?
He had been told people would like it.
Ah, okay. Okay. Okay.
And
Right.
and so he didn't understand that.
Mm.
But you get told it enough and then you start to doubt it. So if you listen to the in Beautiful Dreamer, he gives four very specific answers in one sound bite as to why Smile didn't come out.
Yeah.
In other places, he talks about, he says, I thought it might destroy the Beach Boys and it might destroy me too. He's got a lot of reasons, and I add a whole bunch of other reasons in the book as well.
Mm.
But but it's kind of like one reason feeds into another. Well, if you don't like this music, or as he says, if you hate this music and you don't think our fans are going to like this music, then maybe this is the wrong direction for us to be going in.
Mm. Mm.
And so those doubts just grow and grow and grow. So
Yeah.
he never doubted the brilliance of the music, and he never doubted the brilliance of the Beach Boys performance on the recordings.
Yeah.
As he said, I needed a year to put it together. Now, was he the issue was he wasn't capable of standing up for himself and saying that and demanding that. That's just not
Okay.
who he was.
See, because in the studio he could be like he could be pretty full on, but probably as a person, he always strike me as he didn't want to hurt anyone's kind of feelings, which is kind of it's such a cutthroat business, the music business, and it's a very hard. I kind of
You've hit the distinction exactly right. In
right.
the studio, he could direct everybody and get exactly what he wanted.
Mm.
But and in his life with his friends, he could do that. He could tell the engineer what he wanted. But when he came to his family and standing up to his family, we have to go back to him being bullied terribly as a child, and that being, that me being a psychologist or psychiatrist, you just don't get over that.
Like I have OCD, and there was something in the book I remember, and I thought, I know Brian gets auditory hallucinations, but there was something that I should have wrote it down, but at the time I was reading it, and I was like, oh no, it went by. But today when I was thinking about it, there was something that I was like, that sounds like a very someone who has OCD, because you can kind of see it in because it's an anxiety thing, whereas like the anxiety takes over, and you're 2 days later you go, oh, that was crazy. But at the time, it consumes you. And it was something in it that I was just like thought, oh my God, I think like I'm not saying I no I'm not diagnosed with Brian Wilson, but it's very like was reminiscent of that kind of thought pattern of OCD of like with to do with Smile because you would get in a pattern of thinking of this and this and this and this and everything kind of adds up and you know what I mean? Maybe I'm just kind of
Well, I think it goes back to just some doubts being expressed.
hmm,
You're going along making this beautiful music with these incredible lyrics that are, as Carl Wilson's first wife says in the book, for the first time in Brian's career, he's working with somebody who's a peer, who's at his level.
Uh, I get you. Yeah.
And so he knows how great it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now the questions start to be asked, and he did not respond well to those doubts. Um, those doubts were not necessarily unreasonable, but the
Mm.
record business nor the Beach Boys' career was set up as such in such a way that Brian could say to him, "Hey guys, sing on this. Let me finish it and put it out as a Brian Wilson solo album. Then we'll get back to making a Beach Boys album." He just that was something he could do. And
Yeah.
there wasn't anybody at the record company who would say, "Hey, we've got this classical label Angel. Why don't we put this out on that label, and then you can, as not a Beach Boys record." It just didn't fit the sign them up, chew them up, spit it out record industry, that would wring you like a sponge until
Mm.
they'd gotten every last hit. And to me, Best of the Beach Boys was the signifier that the record company thought, oh, they're not going to be any more hits.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy like that they release it after Pet Sounds. I know hindsight is a lot of things in life, when you look back, especially music. But like, I'm thinking, how could anyone hear that at the time, from a record label to even some of the guys in the Beach Boys, and not kind of put a massive kind of PR or whatever behind it? Because it's like that has hits on it, which is bizarre that it was
Well,
never
that's
really.
that. Well, so that's the thing. Forget whether you liked it or not, whether you
Yeah,
believed it or not. It had four hits on it: a top five hit, a top 10 hit, two top 40 hits. So put a sticker on the album,
yeah,
includes the top 40 hits. Wouldn't it be nice? Loop John B. God
yeah,
only knows Caroline.
yeah.
So they didn't sell it like that.
Mm,
They pressed 300,000 copies, and it didn't sell as quickly as the previous Beach Boys album, Beach Boys Party, which, okay, so it didn't sell as quickly as that. It still went to number 10 in the charts. So now the record stores sell out. And as best as we can tell, when the record stores ordered copies of Pet Sounds, what they got shipped to them was the best of the Beach Boys. So
right.
Capital is, in a sense, sabotaging Pet Sounds at that time.
That's mad, dude. Like, why? It's so. But then, in a weird way, they let him do Good Vibrations. They were kind of behind him to do, not behind him, but you know what I mean. He was allotted that time to do Good Vibrations, and Good
Well, he
Vibrations is.
wasn't. They weren't happy about it. It's what's taking so long. Why is it costing so much? Why are you going to so many
Yeah, yeah,
different studios? Where's the single? Where's the single? That was the record business at that time.
yeah, yeah. But it is a radically different sounding. Like even today, you play that today, and nothing sounds like it. It's still, but I think that's the genius of Brian, of like that he can make something that's complex, and you can get it on a complexity level of like when you deconstruct the chords and you hear slash chords and inversions, and but at another level it's so catchy, and it's deceivingly, you think, oh, that's pop music. It's like, yeah, but it's a different level of pop music. And I just think that's to me, that's kind of the true genius of Brian. Obviously with the harmonies and stuff like that as well, but to do that, because it's really hard to write a really great pop song, but to write a amazing pop song and that has complexity in it, but still sounds, you can anyone can kind of listen to it, if you get what I mean. That's genius, like, to do that, I think.
It's well, yeah, it is. Although Brian rejected it when he was called a genius. He said, "I'm ingenious."
I like that.
But yeah, no, Sir George Martin, Elton John, Sir Elton John, Sir Paul McCartney, uh, Sir Barry Gibb, they're all calling him a genius. So who am I to argue with that?
Mm, mm.
Um, but and the book begins with a quote from somebody who is unquestionably a genius. and it's life is so amazing. When Van Dyke Parks was like a 9-year-old boy and living in Princeton, New Jersey, he met Albert Einstein.
Yeah, crazy.
There's so many things here that feel um, Shakespearean, biblical, like everything happened the way it was supposed to happen. That tragically for Brian, um, smiled. He didn't get the year. He had to shelve it, and he went into decades of very difficult life,
Mm, mm,
and
mm.
including what he described as 9 years in prison with this weird psychologist, and and
Yeah.
and for him to come out of all of this and have the courage to do Brian Wilson Presents Smile. Um, to me, it's the triumph of that human spirit that's really most significant here. And by the way, when he was doing interviews for Smile, he was getting questions like, "So how is this different from the Smile you would have done back in '67?" So the questions didn't end, but he
Yeah.
he had a great answer. He said, "This is how I feel about the music now."
Mm, mm. Yeah.
I mean, how you're 62, not 24. How are you supposed to put yourself in the head of a 24-year-old when you're 62?
Yeah. Well, you can't really, can you?
No.
That's kind of the thing. Just it's because everyone, no matter who you are, you change. Even the way you even change how you kind of approach music and how you write music and how so it can never be the same. It can never. It can never. I remember, I went to the premiere to see that Lucky Old Son, which I think is, if you're going to rank his solo records, that to me that's kind of just below Smile. I think that is it's a brilliant piece of music. I think it was like he was on the aftermath of that kind of
Hmm.
run. And me and my friend were in the corner. It was in, the festival hall, and we were dancing like idiots. After the concert, this woman comes running up to us, and she's like, "Hey, you the guys dancing?" And we're like, "Oh, yeah." I was like, "Yeah." And then I'm like talking to her, and then I see two guys approaching. I'm like, "Are they the guys from the band?" It was like, so Scott was coming, and I forget who else was coming, but it turns out it was Scott's wife at the time. And she was like, "Oh, do you want to come to the gig tomorrow? And do you want to meet Brian Wilson?" And I was like, no, I'm okay with meeting Brian Wilson. She's like, "What?" I was like, "No, no, it's cool. I don't want to annoy him." Because she was like, "All right, okay." I was like, "Yeah," because I thought in my head, so many people just want to, go and talk to him, and I was like, just let the guy just give him, he just wants a bit of peace. I was just like, I would be cool.
You're one in a million, Paul. Because everybody wants to be in his presence. Same with Sir Paul McCartney. Everybody wants. Now, Sir Paul is 180 degrees different from Brian in that Sir Paul almost can look at you and read your mind and know what you need to get from him in that 30 seconds or a minute or 3 minutes. And he gives you the Paul McCartney experience that
Right.
that, that you want and need.
Yeah.
Whereas Brian, good luck. You
Yeah.
just you just never know. It's this is a chore. I've got to meet these people.
Yeah.
Oh, can I go get something to eat? So good on you for turning it down. How could you do that? You would have had backs.
So many people said that to me. I was like, yeah, but it's just like, I love the guy's music and I really respect him as a person. I don't want to, he's so many people trying to clamor to get to him. And you can kind of, sometimes you can see someone and kind of have an affinity with them and kind of go, I know that, like, that's not the side of things he likes doing. But that's what my understanding, what I think. Maybe I'm wrong. But so,
I think what you're saying is beautiful. I think
right.
it really is.
Oh, well, thanks very much. Do you think Warner actually kind of knew how to promote the Beach Boys properly, like Capitol did? Because Sunflower is such a great record. I mean, that was such a 70s, what was it, 1970? Like it sounds modern. It's not like they were doing surf songs. They were doing, it was it sounded like a modern record at that time. That's a great record, but
I don't
do,
think it was
do
that Warner didn't know how to publicize them. I think it was because on the label it said the Beach Boys, and
okay.
AM radio was not going to play a new song from the Beach Boys.
Wow.
They were passé. They were old news. I mean, in America, they had two, you know, I think top 20, top 40 hits with Darlin' and Do It Again.
Yeah.
Once you know, Smile was demolished, and so they, by 1970, who were the Beach Boys? And the answer was no, no. We're going to play, you know, Let It Be by the Beatles. We're going to play the Rolling Stones' latest single. We're going to play whatever. We're going to play Carole King, or it's a little early for Carole King, but
Yeah.
we're going to play Crosby, Stills and Nash, certainly. So
Mm.
you're if you're a record promoter, you're up against CSNY,
Right, right. I
and they're
get
in
you.
there and they're in there with Ohio. This song about what had happened, the Kent State murders, and how does that compare to add some music to your day? I mean, Sunflowers is beautiful, beautiful record. It's the best album that the Beach Boys collectively made, unquestionably. It's not my favorite of the whole group's career, but it's a great, great record. Um, but there's nothing there that screams AM radio single in that era. There were Three Dog Nights on the radio with Joy to the World.
Okay, yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah. I'm probably just coming out of some of this, when when you kind of, as a fan, you're like, how is that not it? Like, because when you like something so much, you're like, that's not, it's like, yeah. I think maybe,
How
this whole world,
Sail on
this whole world,
Sailor was
maybe.
barely a hit.
Yeah,
This whole world,
that's a great song.
it's
Like this,
spectacular. It's like what in the heck did he just do in 2 minutes?
yeah, the changes, like, is the changes that he's doing, chord changes are amazing. It's brilliant. Like, just, like that you don't kind of, some people do chord changes and especially key changes, modulations, and you hear the modulation. Brian has this really great way of like, it's so perfectly done. His modulations are so well done that you're like, they're not like, it's not, you don't go, oh yeah, it's a modulator straight away. Because it's just so well done. Like it just,
Well, he has an unerring instinct for
yeah.
how things feel.
Mm, mm,
And that's what he was always about. How does this record feel?
yeah, yeah,
And so that was what you know he's trying to live up to the past. The other thing that rightly or wrongly, and certainly the Beatles and Stones are notable exceptions. Elton John is an exception. Um, you kind of get, if you're lucky, you get 5 years on the charts,
yeah.
and then okay, it goes from who are they to wow, I really like them, to they're amazing, to I'm had enough of that.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And so by 67, people had enough of it.
Mm,
And so Brian reinvents himself in his solo career. I mean, you were talking about that Lucky Old Son. I think his first solo album has the best group of pure Brian Wilson songs, plus Rio Grande, which is him doing a smile like cut at the request of the record company. And it's like, well, this was easy for you, Brian.
I
I mean,
think I think oh sorry. I think the problem with that record is the production. I think it's not very Brian Wilson kind of production of it, and I think that probably, because the songs are great songs, but I think that kind of takes away from it. Because everyone I talk to kind of always say, we always talk the production on that record. It's very like not Brian Wilson
well, I hear
production.
what you're saying. It's got a bunch of different producers, including Brian. I think if Jeff Lynne had produced the whole record, it would have been a big smash.
Yeah, he did
Because
Rio Grande for that, didn't he?
no, he just did Let It Shine.
Oh, Let It
And
Shine.
and
Sorry, sorry. Yeah,
and for some reason on that one track, Brian is singing beautifully, lead vocal and harmonies. It's
yeah,
like I don't know, did he respect Jeff enough? I mean, the ELO was, one of my favorite groups in the
yeah,
70s. And so maybe, I'm sure he was a big ELO fan.
yeah.
It's just,
Though it was
you
the
had
80s as well. You couldn't get away with not doing that kind of gated snare. And, it was, that was even McCartney was doing that kind of thing. I just think in hindsight, I think when 80s bands who grew up in the 80s, it's not as noticeable. But when you came from the 60s and 70s, it's very jarring when you hear a gated snare on a Brian Wilson track. It's like, oh, that sounds off. Just something weird about it,
now you're getting to the area that my knowledge is minuscule in.
Okay, well, like a gated snare would be like, that kind of very reverb, big kind of sounding snare, like
Hmm.
that kind of you would have on like Phil Collinsy kind of stuff, that like, du-du-du-du. But yeah, so not as organic, if you know what I mean, like lots of synths and all that kind of stuff. Whereas Brian, that's what I love about the Beach Boys. It's organic, there's not loads of synths. Not that I've nothing against synths, but you know what I mean. I love
Well,
them.
look, I mean, you look at Beach Boys Love You. It's
Yeah, the
Brian
Moog, the
playing with
Moog.
synths.
Yeah, playing that Moog, yeah. In the book, you had mentioned that when you read that Nolan article in the in Rolling Stone 1971, what was um what was it like around that time when people when that article came out? Was there a kind of resurgence from that towards people listening to Smile, or probably never heard of the whole? There's probably a lot of people never heard of the whole Smile myth.
Well, the Tom Nolan two-piece article, first one was a cover story in Rolling Stone in the fall of 1971,
Mm.
was timed for the release of the Surf's Up album.
Oh yes, 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 yes. Okay.
And so what that did, especially for people like me, was like, oh my God, I've got to hear what he's talking about in this article where he's going on and on about Smile. Because Tom was
Yeah.
there in 66 when Brian was talking about I'm going to write a teenage symphony to God. And so when I heard Surf's Up, it was like, well, this is as beautiful, if not more so, than what he's describing. I want to hear the rest of it. And then I heard Till I Die, and it was not only one of the saddest songs I'd ever heard, but it said, well, Brian can still do it.
Yeah.
He's got
Yeah.
all his powers are intact. And my roommate and I, we became obsessed. And in those days, you could go into what they called the cutout bins in the record stores, and I was able to get 2020 and all the previous Capitol albums. And so I heard Our Prayer and Cabanescence, and so now I'm hearing, wait a second, and I knew Heroes and Villains from a greatest hits album I had bought, and so Heroes and Villains, Surfs Up, Cabanescence, Our Prayer. I heard the song Wonderful on Smiley Smile. It's like, well, yeah, this was going to be an unbelievable album.
Yeah.
And so my roommate and I just crazy obsessed. And one day he said to me, because I was really angry about it. It's like, well, if you're so angry about it, do something. And I said, okay, I'm going to move to California, write a book about Brian, become his friend, and help him finish Smile. You talk about madness. I mean, what was that other than me really finding my calling in life?
Yeah. Yeah. You need that though. When you're young, you have that kind of like, I'm gonna do this, and you need that because if you don't, like, you will never get there. You need that kind of complete focus thinking on that thing, and you almost kind of manifest it to happen. It must have been really surreal when you went from really into the music to kind of being involved in that circle of music.
Everything about it is surreal.
Yeah.
I
Do you
mean,
still find it surreal?
um, if I look back on it, if I'm asked about it, it is surreal. I feel nowadays I feel a great responsibility to get as much out into the world from my archives
Mm.
as possible, which is one of the reasons this book was so important, uh, because it is just filled with stories that no one has ever heard. Um, but surreal, yes. Sad, yes. Um, but still, you can celebrate. I mean, we last Monday at my UCLA class, Darian Sahanaja, Probin Gregory, and Nelson Bragg all came to class
Wow.
and and uh, and performed three songs from Smile,
That's cool.
and and we had an event that night at UCLA with the three of them and me and Denny Tedesco, who directed the Wrecking Crew, because his father Tommy Tedesco was in the Wrecking Crew,
Mm.
and he interviewed me and he interviewed the other guys, and it ended with it began with them performing God Only Knows, and the evening ended with them doing Heroes and Villains, Wonderful, and Surfs Up, and it's posted on my Facebook page around May 12th, probably May 13th. It's posted, but
Cool. I'll check
but
that out.
but the thing that during rehearsal, Darian had said to me, "Do you think you could sing this bridge from Heroes and Villains?" And I said, "Only one?" And he laughed. And he gave me two pieces to sing, and all during rehearsal, I wasn't great, to say the
Yeah.
least. But the night of the show, I'll leave it up to you and your viewers to judge. But I didn't embarrass myself. We'll leave it at that.
Good man. Good man. What was the when you because you wrote the book, it's like people are telling kind of their side of the like a narrative of kind of going throughout the years. How
Right.
did you come apart? Not come apart. How did you reach that point to do that? Were you always going to write the book like that, or did you change, or how did that?
So in 2022, Omnibus Books published an updated version of the Beach Boys California Myth called God Only Knows, and it's a massive update. The update actually was more than half the length of the original book, and it was successful. And I said to him, 2024 is the 20th anniversary of Brian Wilson Presents Smile. We should do a book to celebrate that moment. And the editor David Barraclough said, "What do you have in mind?" And I said, "Well, I'd love to publish a book with the entire text of all the interviews I did for the Beautiful Dreamer documentary." And he said, "No, interview books don't do well for us." So he said, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "Well, if you could do this as an oral history, um, we'd want to do it." And my heart really sank because I knew how much work that was. It was like making a 16-hour documentary. But fortunately, um, I had those interviews to draw upon. I did 25 new interviews for the book. Got great reminiscences from the people who were at the Royal Festival Hall or some other stop on the worldwide tour. And then I came up with the idea of having an anthology in the back of essays of people writing about Smile, because as I say in the author's note at the beginning, I've had my say about Smile. It's time for everybody else to kind of chime in. And so we get a wide variety of voices talking about Brian and Smile from a lot of different perspectives. The oral history was pretty simple in terms of my guiding light, if you will, was if I couldn't see it as in terms of a visual interview, or I couldn't actually hear it, it wasn't going to go in the book because I wanted to make sure the quotes were accurate.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. It was quite interesting because to hear not Brian, sorry, to hear Van Dyke talking about like really complimenting the music. 'Cause I never really heard him kind of. He was very like complimentary about Brian's talent. I've heard him being complimented about his talent, but I've never heard him like saying how much he was kind of like respected and was into the music before Smile. Like he was really into that. So I was like, all right. I heard him. I would always hear Van like talking about Smile and what he worked on in Smile,
Right.
but he was talking about pre-Smile and how much he respected what Brian was doing, which was kind of It was kind of, I was that was like, that's kind of interesting because a lot of Van Dyke stuff I hadn't heard him say before. Like I said to you at the start about him living with them and stuff like that, which is kind of interesting because I know he's not too pushed about talking about Smile stuff now, but yeah,
Well,
because
one of the great things was I asked him to do a new interview for the book, and he said, "I don't want to." And
mm,
so I looked at the 2004 interview, and I sent him an email. I said, "Van Dyke, I'm so glad we didn't do a new interview. The one you did back in 2004 is so great." And one of the things that was great about that interview and all the band interviews was that I had done them before the world premiere. So
oh
they were
right,
telling the story as it was unfolding, as they were experiencing it. So when it came to do that part of the oral history, because I was there, so I knew what had happened. So I was
mm,
okay. What's the right quote to take us to the next beat of the story?
yeah, it was cool. It was cool because it's kind of like you can there people are telling their stories and then some people kind of have their own side of the story and then some which is kind of cool because you're not like you're not just telling one, it's people kind of telling their, and I guess life is like that, you know, someone has their own side of things and someone has their own side of things, and yeah, it's cool. But it was,
When it comes to Smile, there's like 50 different sides.
yeah, yeah,
One of the things I say in the book is, as a kid, we had these kaleidoscopes, and if you looked at it, things looked one way, and then you turn the kaleidoscope, and you see things completely differently.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and and so there's a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different points of view. But ultimately, this is a book to celebrate the fact that this guy had the courage to do this.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
it's that is it, I wish I could be back in the Royal Festival Hall to experience that again, because there's nothing to compare to that moment when he did it the first time.
Smile is interesting though because in a weird way it's like the first interactive record from because it people could piece it together, you know, people, it's the first record that people actually could take their own kind of thing and piece it together before it kind of came out. You know, they had their own order of it, and some people didn't put good vibrations on it, and some people put things here, and some people put there. Like, it's actually the first interactive record, if that makes any sense, if you get me. It's like you're your own, it's a director, and you're directing its own kind of thing.
Well, it is since they put out the Smile sessions. It
Mm.
was back in the late 70s, 80s, and 90s when there was nothing but bootlegs and some official releases of songs. And I think that DIY, do it yourself Smile was important in kind of creating this cult of Brian Wilson, if you will.
Yeah.
This sense that and cult of Smile that had nothing to do with the Beach Boys.
Yeah. I remember getting all those kind of bootlegs and stuff. You know, I find them on the internet going, oh my God, and this part's from this. And like, remember hearing George fell into his horn. Was that on Smile? Like a Smile thing? Was it George fell into his horn, French horn? I think that was a
Yes.
Smile. That was a Smile thing. It's all these little weird little things. It's such a, but that record
Well,
still sounds great.
yeah. I mean, the thing about it is he was having fun,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
his bandmates weren't.
yes, yeah. You can kind of sense that, can't you? But it's amazing they did all that work as well, even though they weren't. Like, you know, I mean, Our Prayer is like so beautiful. Like, it's such an amazing just piece of music. Like to start that record off. If that, you know, you like the Smile.
It's
If you went from
Foley.
Pet Sounds, yeah. It's but going from Pet Sounds to Smile in a year, even that's a huge leap. Like it's such a massive like leap that they were making, even going from 64 to 67. Same with the Beatles, you know, from I Want to Hold Your Hand to what 4 years later, and they've got or 3 years later, and they're doing Strawberry Fields Forever. Like it's you know those leaps that those guys were doing.
Well, that's what I ask in the book. I said if the Beatles can go from want to hold your hand to Strawberry Fields in 3 years, why can't Brian go from Surfing USA to Surfs Up in three
Yeah,
years?
great piece of music though. That whole record is just amazing. When's the last time you actually listened to the record? Brian Wilson presents Smile.
Um, a couple of weeks ago, while I was
Really, yeah.
doing my back exercises, I'm more likely to actually listen to and don't everybody get mad at me, but maybe there's a millionaire in your audience. The world premiere concert, because there's something about that has it just has more emotion in it for me. Um, and obviously the audience applause and everything. Love watching that. And we're trying to get that out as a well, so quite a follow-up. The Beautiful Dreamer came out in 2004 as a new documentary, just focusing on the night of the world premiere, because Beautiful Dreamer ends with Brian on stage at the end of the show. We don't have any of the post-show reaction backstage. We don't have any of the retrospective thoughts of it. We don't really know much of we don't have anything from the recording studio where I was still filming.
Oh wow. So you've
While
way more than that's on the documentary.
only about 50 hours more.
Really? Oh, dude. Yeah, man, you gotta put that out. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, well, we need Peter Jackson.
Yeah. Get Peter Jackson to demix some stuff. Yeah, man. Wow. Geez, that's
So,
a lot to have.
yeah, no, and it's a lot to have unhappily, because I want to
Right.
get it. I want to get it out into the world. It's just, maybe this next year will be the year it happens. But
So sorry to interrupt you. How much? So I know there's on the because I have the DVD, but there's a part in the DVD with the making of Smiley's in the documentary and stuff in the studio. Sorry. So how much more studio stuff do you have?
a couple hours more of studio stuff. I don't.
Oh,
I mean, it
dude.
didn't take them that long to record it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was quite quick, wasn't it?
It was really quick, like 3 days. And
Wow.
for me, what was one of the greatest moments is Brian, waving for me to come out of the control room during barnyard to do an animal sound. And, you know, I thought I was doing a sheep, but apparently it was a goat.
Yeah, close enough, you know.
Not to sheep, I don't think. I don't think
What
they would want to hear that.
was Brian saying? Was he saying it's not goat-like
Oh
or
no, no, no.
something?
He was happy. I think Nelson was doing a good sheep.
Okay,
So
okay.
it worked out just fine.
Man, you should just release that whole thing of just how many hours it is just in studio. I'd watch that alone. I'd pay for that. That'd be just great. Like,
That's
put
what
the
I'm saying.
50 hours there.
You got to find a millionaire to do it. Then we can go and edit it properly and do
Yeah.
do all the color correction and sound mixing that Darian would do. And it's just the nature of the business is. Oh, you already did a documentary on Smile.
Could you do like a crowdfunding kind of thing? You know, where people like you put up a thing how much you actually need and then people fund to it and then once you get that amount you can use it.
Yes,
I
I,
think I
I'm.
think I think a lot of
I
people would do
Well,
that.
if we're not successful this year in finding the right folks to finance it, maybe that's what we'll do next year.
Just before I let you go, what are you working on at the moment? But I know you've just got the lovely book out, which I'll show
Thank you.
just again. Just
So I teach at UCLA.
I
I
love the
teach at
cover.
UCLA. Thank you. Mark London did a great job on the
It's
cover. It
beautiful.
really it really pops.
It does.
Um,
It so kind of stands out when you see it. You're like, oh, it's cool. It's got the cover Brian Wilson presents and it's kind of smile. Yeah, it's cool, man.
yeah, so Mark had designed the logo for the album, so he used it for this. At UCLA this quarter, I'm teaching a course called Good and Bad Vibrations, about Brian and the Beach Boys. And 2 weeks ago at class, Mike Love was a guest.
Oh, wow.
So you can see the interview I did with him. That's also on my Facebook page, posted around May 6th or 7th, something like that. Well, May 8th, probably.
Okay.
And then the big event on May 12th at UCLA with the members of the band. And we had a standing room only crowd. It was just a wonderful night of talking about Smile and hearing. Could you hear three better Smile songs than
Yeah, man.
the ones they played? And they opened the show with God Only Knows, so you're kind of in Brian Wilson heaven there.
That's
Um,
great.
the quarter comes to an end in a couple of weeks, and during the summer I have a course on the legends of songwriting. which are recordings of interviews I did with Jimmy Webb and Mike Stoller and Man and Weil and Lamont Dozier and Randy Newman and Burt Bacharach. So
Wow.
it's a real amazing course in how do people become successful at what they're most passionate about. And I love that class because almost nobody in the course is going to become a famous songwriter, more likely than not. But I'm not teaching them how to become a great songwriter. I'm teaching them how to be successful in life. So that's really important. Um, and I might take a little time off. Um,
Yeah.
a little time because I already have a book in mind for next year.
Oh, really? Can you
But
say what it is, or
no,
is no?
nope.
Okay, I won't ask
Uh,
so.
you can ask.
You
I'm not
just
going to tell
don't.
I'm not going to tell you because the idea of it has changed a few times, and I'm waiting for the publisher to say yes or no on it. But you know, I will say it has to do with Brian Wilson. We'll leave it at that.
Okay, that's cool.
And again, I've got all this archival stuff, and the goal is to get it out into the world for people who care, for future generations, because I believe strongly that 50, 100, 200 years from now, people are going to be studying him the way they might study Mozart today or Bach, and there isn't a whole lot of material about what they were like as people or interviews with them. So,
Yeah.
so, 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 I wanted to give as full a picture of Brian Wilson as is possible,
Hmm.
uh, given my friendship with him and my work with him.
Oh, that's cool, man. That's great. David, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you talking to me about your book. It's cool, man.
My pleasure, Paul.
That's cool, man.
It's great to talk with people who actually know more about music than I do, and feel as strongly as about Smile as I do. So this was a great conversation.
Oh, thank you, man. Thank you very much. It's always good to talk to you, bro. And have
Great.
a lovely day. What time is it there
You,
now?
it's coming up on 2 o'clock.
Oh, you're grand. You're grand. I'm like nearly 10 here. Right, brother. Thanks very much.
You're, thank you. Take care, man.
Have a great day.
You
Bye
too.
bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.